Will you be my date to my ex's wedding? I never thought I'd be the type of Omega who would approach a complete stranger in a hotel lobby. But there I was, scent blockers failing, hands trembling, gripping my design portfolio like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to earth. 10 days until Minho's wedding. 10 days until I'd become the cautionary tale whispered over champagne flutes. Poor Ralph Harrison, the Omega who thought independence could replace submission. The invitation had arrived on a Wednesday. Cream-colored envelope, gold embossing, paper so thick it felt like a weapon. I'd recognized the style immediately, Minho's mother's signature touch. Understated but unmistakably expensive. The kind of stationery that announced, "We have arrived, and you have not." For 5 days, it sat unopened on my kitchen counter in my Upper West Side apartment. I knew what it contained. The final nail in the coffin of my self-worth. When I finally tore it open, my hands shook so violently I nearly ripped the card in half. The embossed text was expected. The handwritten note beneath it was a masterpiece of elegant cruelty. "We hope you found contentment in your career, as that seems to be your calling. Warmly, the Park family." I laughed until I couldn't breathe. Or maybe I stopped breathing and mistook suffocation for laughter. The boundaries between humiliation and rage had blurred since the day Minho told me I was too willful for a proper bonding. The alpha sitting across the St. Regis lobby looked like he could buy and sell entire city blocks without blinking. Not just wealthy, though his Tom Ford suit and understated Patek Philippe watch screamed old money, but the kind of self-possessed that comes from genuine power. He was reading the Wall Street Journal, expression unreadable, and I'd been watching him for 23 minutes. Building courage. Rehearsing my insane request. Wondering what kind of desperate Omega propositions a stranger. This kind. The kind who spent 3 years loving an alpha who discarded him for a suitable Omega from the right family. The kind who still wakes at 3 a.m., wondering if being independent really does make him a failed Omega. The kind who can't stomach walking into that Plaza Hotel ballroom alone while society's elite whisper. Ralph Harrison, the Omega who confused ambition with adequacy. I remember the day Minho ended us. Early March, during the first warm afternoon of spring. We were supposed to be touring venues for our bonding ceremony. Instead, he took me to CHANT House, public enough to prevent a scene, private enough for surgical humiliation, and explained with practiced gentleness that I didn't understand traditional values. That his family had expectations. That a proper Omega would prioritize family over career. That I was, fundamentally, the wrong kind of Omega for his future. Now I was about to prove him right in the most spectacular way possible. I stood, crossed the marble floor, and asked the most powerful-looking alpha in New York City the most absurd question of my life. Will you be my date to my ex's wedding? 3 weeks earlier, I'd still believed in salvageable things. Minho had texted me that morning with unusual formality. "Can we meet at CHAN? 2 p.m. We need to talk." No emoji. No casual warmth. Just sterile words that landed in my stomach like stones. I told myself it was about the bonding ceremony venue. We'd been debating between the Metropolitan Club and somewhere less traditional. I'd been pushing for Brooklyn Botanic Garden, something personal, something that felt like us rather than a performance for his family's approval. I should have known better. CHANT House sits tucked on a quiet street in the East Village, all dark wood and paper screens and the kind of cultivated serenity that makes breakups feel like meditations. Minho had reserved the small private room in the back. Of course he had. Public enough that I couldn't make a scene. Private enough that no one would witness my humiliation. He was already seated when I arrived, wearing the navy Bryony suit I'd helped him pick out for his promotion celebration. His jaw was set in that particular way that meant he'd rehearsed this conversation. My Omega instinct screamed warning, but I'd spent 28 years learning to ignore those instincts. Independence over intuition. Agency over biology. Ralph. He gestured to the cushion across from him. Not affectionate. Clinical. Sit. I sat today. The server brought tea, sencha, fragrant and green, and Minho waited until she'd retreated before speaking. He'd always had impeccable timing. Perfect control. It was one of the things I'd loved about him, back when I'd confused emotional restraint for stability. "I've been thinking about our future," he began, hands folded on the low table between us. About what a bonding between us would actually look like. Would. Past conditional. Already gone. And I've realized we want fundamentally different things. His voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse. You're brilliant, Ralph. Your design work is extraordinary. But you don't understand traditional values. You don't understand what's expected. Expected of whom? My voice came out steadier than I felt. Expected by whom? Expected of an Omega in a proper bonding. He said it like it was obvious. Like I was being deliberately obtuse. My family has certain standards. Certain requirements. You mean your mother has requirements? His jaw tightened. My mother wants what's best for our family. And she's helped me see that we're not compatible in the ways that matter. You're too Western. Too willful. You'd never be happy prioritizing family over your career, and I need a partner who understands that family comes first. The tea was going cold between us. I watched steam rise and dissipate, thinking absurdly about thermodynamics. About how energy transforms but never disappears. About how the warmth between us had transformed into this calculated distance. You're breaking our bond. Not a question. We were never formally bonded, Ralph. We were dating. And now we're not. He pulled out his phone, swiped to his calendar with the efficiency of a man checking off a task. I think it's best if we make a clean break. I'll have my assistant coordinate picking up my things from your apartment. 3 years. 3 years of inside jokes and shared dinners and learning to navigate his family's expectations. 3 years of slowly contorting myself into something more acceptable, more traditional, more less. And he was scheduling the disposal of our relationship like a business meeting. I stood. Dignity was all I had left, so I wore it like armor. I hope you find what you're looking for, Minho. I hope she's everything your mother wants. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. Ralph. Don't. I grabbed my coat. Just don't. I made it to the street before the shaking started. The invitation arrived exactly 2 weeks later, timed with the precision Minho brought to everything. Wednesday morning, slipped under my apartment door by some courier who probably cost more than my monthly utilities. I'd been running late for a client meeting, already dressed and caffeinated and determinedly fine. The envelope stopped me cold. Park Minho and Kim Dae-hyun request the pleasure of your company. My hands went numb reading it. The Plaza Hotel. Black tie. 6 weeks away. And beneath the formal text, in his mother's distinctive calligraphy. We hope you found contentment in your career, as that seems to be your calling. Warmly, the Park family. Warmly. The word sat on the page like a brand. Like a diagnosis. Like confirmation of every fear that woke me at 3 a.m., that I was broken, defective, wrong. That an Omega who chose ambition over submission was choosing loneliness. That independence was just another word for inadequate. I called in sick to my meeting. Spent the day staring at that cream-colored card, at the gold embossing that probably cost more than some people's rent. At the elegant script that so politely, so warmly, told me I'd failed at the most fundamental requirement of my designation. By evening, rage had crystallized into something sharp and purposeful. They wanted to see me broken? They'd see me victorious. They wanted to parade Minho's suitable Omega? I'd show them what unsuitable looked like when it walked in on the arm of someone who made their old money look like pocket change. I needed a date. Not just any date, I needed an alpha who could eclipse Minho's entire family's carefully curated status. Someone who could walk into the plaza like he owned it and make everyone forget I'd ever been deemed insufficient. I needed someone impossible. 3 days later, I walked into the St. Regis lobby and found him. The alpha looked up from his Wall Street Journal with the kind of measured attention that suggested he'd been aware of my approach long before I arrived. Dark eyes swept over me, not invasive, but assessing. Reading me the way I read spatial dimensions and color theory. Yes? His voice was deeper than I'd expected. Controlled. The kind of voice that didn't need volume to command a room. My carefully rehearsed speech evaporated. What remained was desperation wrapped in pride. I need to hire you, I said, and immediately wanted to dissolve into the marble floor. Hire. Like he was a service provider. Like this wasn't the most insane proposition in Manhattan. One eyebrow lifted, the only indication of surprise on an otherwise composed face. I'm listening. The fact that he didn't immediately laugh or call security gave me enough courage to continue. I slid into the chair across from him uninvited, portfolio case clutched in my lap like a shield. My ex is getting married in 10 days. At the plaza. To the right kind of Omega from the right kind of family. The bitterness in my voice was ugly, but I was past pretending. I need a date. Not just any date, I need someone who makes his family's old money look like pocket change. Someone who walks into that ballroom like he owns it. Someone who makes them forget they ever called me inadequate. He set down his newspaper with deliberate precision, folding it along creases that were already perfect. And you think I'm that someone? I know you are. I pulled out my phone, called up the photo I'd found during my 3 days of desperate research. Jamin Lee. CEO of Nexus Innovations. Self-made billionaire who disrupted Fifth Avenue's tech monopoly before you turned 35. You bought the Vanderbilt building last year and turned it into affordable housing. You told Forbes that inherited wealth was capitalism's participation trophy. Something flickered in his expression, amusement, maybe, or recognition that I'd done my homework. You've been stalking me. I've been researching you. There's a difference. I leaned forward, abandoning pretense. I can pay you. Name your price. It's 1 evening. 4 hours, maximum. You show up, you smile, you let them think an Omega like me could attract an alpha like you, and then you never have to see me again. An Omega like you. He repeated the phrase slowly, tasting it. What kind of Omega is that, exactly? The question landed like a blade between ribs. I could deflect. I could lie. Instead, I told the truth that had been choking me for 3 weeks. The wrong kind. Too ambitious. Too Western. Too unwilling to make myself smaller so an alpha feels bigger. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against my portfolio. The kind who prioritizes career over traditional Omega duties. The kind who gets replaced by someone more suitable. Silence stretched between us. In the background, the hotel lobby hummed with discreet luxury, low conversations, the clink of crystal, the whisper of expensive fabric. Jamin studied me with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but instead felt like being seen for the first time in months. I don't need your money, he said finally. My stomach dropped. Then. But I'll do it. The world tilted. You, what? He leaned back in his chair, alpha pheromones controlled but present, sandalwood and something sharper, like winter air. I grew up in a studio apartment in Brooklyn. My mother cleaned offices in Manhattan buildings she couldn't afford to enter through the front door. When I started Nexus, every old money firm on Fifth Avenue told me I didn't understand how things are done. That I didn't have the right pedigree. The right connections. His smile was sharp enough to cut. I understand what it's like to be judged by circumstances of birth rather than merit. So this is, what? Charity? No. The word was firm. This is recognition. And maybe a little revenge. He pulled out his phone, sleek, minimalist, probably custom, and opened a new contact. But I have one condition. Name it. Be honest with me. Not the performance you're planning for your ex. Not the armor you're wearing right now. His eyes held mine. Tell me the real reason you're doing this. The question cracked something open in my chest. The truth spilled out raw and ugly. I want them to see I'm not broken. My voice fractured. I want them to see that an Omega can be independent and ambitious and still be chosen. That refusing to submit doesn't make me defective. That Minho was wrong. I swallowed hard. I want them to look at me and regret ever making me feel like I wasn't enough. Jamin was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, towering over me with the kind of presence that made Minho's carefully cultivated authority look like a performance. He extended his hand. Then let's show them exactly that. His grip was warm and certain. When I stood, my legs barely held me. I'll have my assistant contact you tomorrow, he said. We'll need to coordinate stories, rehearse. Make this convincing. Thank you. The words felt insufficient. I don't know why you're helping me, but thank you. Something in his expression shifted, softened, almost. Maybe I'm helping both of us, Ralph Harrison. He knew my name. I hadn't told him my name. Before I could ask, he gathered his newspaper and was walking toward the elevators, every inch the alpha who'd built an empire from nothing and now held it all with casual grace. I stood in the lobby, heart hammering, wondering what I'd just set in motion. 10 days until Minho's wedding. 10 days to stop being the Omega who wasn't enough. The game had begun. Jamin arrived at my Soho studio exactly on time, which somehow felt like a power move. I'd spent the morning stress cleaning, rearranging fabric swatches, repositioning my mood boards like they were chess pieces in a game I didn't know how to play. The studio was my sanctuary, exposed brick, floor-to-ceiling windows flooding the space with afternoon light, drafting tables covered in sketches for the Hudson Yards project I'd been pouring myself into since the breakup. It was the most honest version of myself, which meant letting Jamin see it felt uncomfortably vulnerable. He stepped inside wearing charcoal slacks and a black Henley that did nothing to diminish his authority and everything to remind me he had a body underneath those tailored suits. His gaze swept the space with the same analytical precision he'd used on me in the hotel lobby. "This is impressive," he said, moving toward my renderings for a boutique hotel in Tribeca. "The structural elements, you're playing with negative space in ways most designers wouldn't risk." I blinked. "You actually understand architecture." "I minored in structural engineering at NYU. He traced a finger along one of my elevation drawings. "Paid my way through with 3 jobs and student loans that took me 8 years to clear. Buildings fascinate me, how they can either trap people or set them free." There was something in his voice that suggested personal experience. I filed it away, this small crack in his polished exterior. "So." I gestured to the vintage leather sofa I'd restored myself. "We should probably figure out our story before I introduce you to 200 people who'll be looking for inconsistencies." Jamin settled into the sofa with easy grace, pulling out his phone. "I took the liberty of having my team research your ex Park Minho, senior associate at Sterling and Hale, comes from old money, grandfather was a shipping magnate. Attended Choate, then Columbia. His fiancée, Kim Dae-hyun, is from a similar background. Omega, traditional upbringing, currently works as a cultural liaison which appears to be code for doesn't work." The clinical recitation of Minho's pedigree shouldn't have stung, but it did. "You did a background check." "I do due diligence. It's how I survived long enough to stop surviving." He set his phone aside. "If we're going to do this, we do it properly. Half measures get exposed." "Fine." I grabbed my notebook, needing something to do with my hands. "So how did we meet? Where would you have wanted to meet someone? Authentically?" The question caught me off guard. I'd expected him to manufacture something impressive, a charity gala, a business function, somewhere befitting his status. Instead, he was asking about me. "The MoMA architecture exhibition," I said slowly. "Last fall. The one on postmodern deconstruction. I went 3 times. There was this installation by Zaha Hadid that I stopped, feeling foolish. Sorry. I get carried away." "Don't apologize." His voice was firm. "That's exactly what I need. The details that make it real." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "So we met at MoMA. I was there because Nexus was sponsoring the exhibition. You gave a talk on how rigid structural thinking limits innovation. I was improvising now, but it felt right. Afterward, I approached you. Challenged something you said about form following function." A smile ghosted across his face, the first genuine one I'd seen. "You challenged me?" "I challenge everyone. It's why Minho's mother hated me." The bitterness crept back. "I don't know how to just nod and agree." "Good." Jamin's eyes held mine. "Don't learn. That quality, the one they called willful, that's not a flaw, Ralph. That's integrity." The air shifted. Thickened. My Omega instincts responded to something in his alpha presence that had nothing to do with our arrangement and everything to do with the way he was looking at me like I was a problem worth solving rather than a problem to be fixed. I cleared my throat, breaking the moment. "So we met at MoMA. Started talking about architecture. Discovered we both think traditional aesthetics can be stifling. And I asked you to consult on Nexus's headquarters redesign. Jamin continued smoothly, back to business. Which isn't entirely a lie, I've been following your work for months. The Tribeca Hotel project, the brownstone renovation in Brooklyn Heights. You have vision. You've been following my work. The question came out smaller than intended. I told you. I do my research. But something in his tone suggested it was more than that. When my assistant mentioned you'd approached me, I already knew your portfolio. Your reputation. The fact that he stopped himself. That I'm what? Undervalued. The word landed between us like a confession. Your ex was an idiot. Heat crawled up my neck. You don't know anything about our relationship. I know he had an Omega with extraordinary talent and made you feel inadequate for having it. That tells me everything. Jamin stood, moving to the window, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the Manhattan skyline. My mother worked herself to exhaustion in buildings she'd never own. When I bought my first property, old money families told me I didn't understand architectural heritage. That new money couldn't appreciate fine things. His reflection in the glass was hard. They're wrong. We appreciate it more because we built it ourselves. I joined him at the window, maintaining careful distance. Is that why you agreed to this? Some kind of class warfare revenge plot? Maybe. He glanced at me sideways. Or maybe I'm tired of watching talented people apologize for not fitting into boxes designed to keep them small. The confession felt too intimate for a business arrangement. I should have stepped back, reinforced boundaries. Instead, I found myself asking, what happened? With your mother? She died 6 years ago. Heart attack. 53 years old, worked herself into the grave so I could go to college. His jaw tightened. The families who looked down on her came to the funeral. Offered condolences. Then went back to their board meetings and tried to block every expansion I proposed. I'm sorry. Don't be. She taught me that dignity isn't about approval, it's about knowing your worth regardless of who refuses to see it. He turned to face me fully. That's what we're going to show them at this wedding, Ralph. Not that you need their approval. That their approval was never necessary. Standing this close, I could smell his scent, controlled but present, all alpha confidence with an underlying warmth that made my Omega biology sing in ways I'd been trained to ignore. The tension wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about two people who'd been told they were wrong for refusing to fit molds, finding recognition in each other. We should practice, I said, voice rougher than intended. Physical contact. They'll expect to see. Not yet. Jamin's hand rose, stopped just short of my face. When I touch you, it needs to be real. Even if the reasons are fabricated. His fingers dropped. I don't do half measures, Ralph. In anything. The promise in those words sent heat pooling low in my stomach. 7 days until the wedding. 7 days until our perfect lie convinced everyone. The terrifying part? It was already starting to convince me. 11 Madison Park was a study in understated elegance, the kind of place where power brokers closed deals over tasting menus and the silence between courses cost as much as the food. Jamin had insisted on dinner, claiming we needed to be comfortable in formal settings together. I suspected he just wanted to feed me. Alphas were territorial that way, even in fake arrangements. The Maître d' recognized him immediately, led us to a corner table with sight lines to the entire room but privacy from prying ears. Jamin moved through the space like he owned it, which he probably could if he wanted to. I felt every eye track us, the powerful Alpha and his unconventional Omega, the kind of pairing that made old money uncomfortable. You're tense, Jamin observed once we were seated, wine poured, menus presented and dismissed in favor of the chef's selection. I'm always tense in places like this. I took a too large sip of wine, something French and probably older than me. Minho used to bring me to restaurants like this. His mother would coincidentally appear with her society friends. I'd spend the entire evening being evaluated like livestock. Jamin's expression darkened. Explain. The first time she met me, she asked what my family did. When I said my father was a literature professor and my mother ran a small gallery in London, she smiled. You know the smile, The one that says how unfortunate for you. I traced the rim of my wine glass. After that, I was the decorator. Never interior designer. Never Ralph. Just the decorator, said with the same tone you'd use for the help. And Minho allowed this. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Minho said I was being sensitive. That his mother was traditional, and I needed to be patient. That once we were bonded, things would improve. The laugh that escaped was bitter. What he meant was once we were bonded, I'd quit my career and focus on proper Omega duties, managing his household, hosting dinners for his colleagues, producing heirs with the right pedigree. Jamin's hand tightened around his wine glass hard enough that I worried it might shatter. The alpha pheromones he usually kept controlled leaked out, ozone and fury, making my Omega instinct simultaneously want to submit and challenge him. He asked you to give up your career. Not asked. Expected. The first course arrived, something delicate and artistic that I couldn't name. I stared at it without appetite. He framed it as we need to think about priorities. As if my work was a hobby. As if 15 years building my reputation was something I could just abandon because it made his mother uncomfortable. Why did it make her uncomfortable? The question pierced something I'd been avoiding. Because I was good at it. Because clients sought me out specifically. Because I made more money than Minho some years, and that violated some unspoken hierarchy. I finally met Jamin's eyes. An Omega isn't supposed to outshine their alpha. That's the real rule, isn't it? Not the submission or the traditional values, it's that we're supposed to make ourselves smaller so they feel bigger. Jamin set down his fork with deliberate control. That's not an alpha-omega dynamic. That's insecurity masquerading as tradition. Try telling that to everyone at this wedding. They'll look at me and see the Omega who couldn't make it work. Who was too ambitious, too proud, too unwilling to compromise. My voice cracked. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm the problem. Stop. The command in his voice made my spine straighten involuntarily. Look at me, Ralph. I did. His eyes were dark with barely contained rage, not at me, but for me. You're not the problem. You never were. He pulled out his phone, swiped through it with sharp movements, then turned the screen toward me. Do you know what this is? Architectural Digest. The fall issue. My Tribeca Hotel project spread across glossy pages, the feature I'd been too heartbroken to properly celebrate when it published. I followed your work for 8 months, Jamin said, voice low and intense. Since you redesigned that brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. I was considering purchasing the property next door and wanted to see comparable renovations. Your portfolio appeared in my research, and I. He paused, something vulnerable crossing his face. I couldn't stop looking. The way you use light, space, negative volume, it's not just design, Ralph. It's architecture as emotional language. Heat flooded my face. You're just saying that. I don't just say anything. He leaned forward, closing the distance between us. I reached out to your firm 3 times trying to schedule a consultation for Nexus headquarters. Your assistant said you were booked solid for 18 months. I was working up the courage to approach you directly when you walked into the St. Regis lobby and propositioned me. The restaurant blurred at the edges. You knew who I was. Before I told you my name. I knew exactly who you were. Ralph Harrison, the interior designer who makes spaces feel like freedom. The Omega who told Metropolitan Home that good design doesn't ask permission, it demands attention. His smile was sharp. When you said you needed someone to show your ex you weren't broken, I thought, he's the one who's broken for not seeing what was right in front of him. My chest constricted. Jamin. You asked me why I agreed to this arrangement. He set his phone down between us like evidence. Maybe it's because I've spent 8 months wanting an excuse to meet you. Maybe it's because watching talented people apologize for their excellence makes me want to burn down hierarchies. His eyes held mine. Or maybe it's because I see myself in you, someone who refused to bow, and paid the price for it. The confession sat between us, heavy with implications we weren't supposed to acknowledge. This was a business arrangement. A performance. A mutually beneficial deception. Except the way he was looking at me felt nothing like business. I'm scared, I admitted, the wine in his words loosening something I'd kept locked tight. What if we pull this off and I still feel inadequate? What if proving them wrong doesn't fix what's broken inside me? Jamin reached across the table, his hand covering mine. The touch sent electricity up my arm, Omega biology singing at alpha contact in ways I'd been trained to suppress. Then we'll deal with that too, he said simply. But Ralph? You're not broken. You're just surrounded by people too small to contain you. The waiter appeared with the next course. Jamin's hand lingered a moment longer before withdrawing, leaving my skin cold with absence. We ate in charged silence, the air between us transformed from professional courtesy into something dangerous. Something real. 4 days until the wedding. 4 days until our perfect performance. The terrifying truth? I was starting to forget we were supposed to be acting. The morning of the wedding, I woke at 5 a.m. to my body staging a revolt. Heat symptoms weren't supposed to work like this. Stress-induced preheat was rare, usually only triggered by extreme emotional distress and my traitorous biology had chosen today of all days to betray me. My skin felt too tight, too sensitive. The scent blockers I'd applied before bed had worn off, leaving my apartment saturated with distressed Omega pheromones, jasmine and something sharper, like burned sugar. I stood in the shower for 40 minutes, water scalding, trying to calm the biological chaos. This couldn't be happening. Not today. Not when I needed to walk into the plaza with my dignity intact and my body under control. The charcoal Tom Ford suit hung on my closet door, androgynous cut, sharp lines, deliberately non-traditional. I'd spent 3 days finding the perfect armor, powerful enough to make a statement, refined enough to belong. The silk shirt underneath was midnight blue, the color of deep water and bruises. War paint for a battlefield disguised as a celebration. By 10 a.m., I'd managed to dress despite trembling hands. The suit fit perfectly, transforming me into someone who looked confident even if I felt like I was vibrating apart at the molecular level. I applied scent blockers with shaking fingers, industrial strength, the kind that made my skin itch but would hopefully mask the preheat symptoms for a few hours. Jamin was due at 11. The wedding started at 2. I had time to get this under control. My body had other plans. At 10:47, the cramps started, low and insistent, the kind that made Omegas pliable and desperate. I gripped the bathroom counter, breathing through it, furious at the timing. Furious at my designation. Furious at the universe for deciding that today, of all days, I should be reminded that biology didn't care about my carefully constructed defiance. The intercom buzzed. Jamin, early. Of course he was early. Alphas could probably smell distressed Omegas from blocks away. I pressed the button with more force than necessary. Come up. By the time he knocked, I'd managed to compose myself into something resembling functional. I opened the door and immediately regretted it. Jamin stood in the hallway in a black three-piece suit that should have been illegal, perfectly tailored, devastatingly sharp, the kind of formal wear that announced wealth and power without trying. His dark hair was styled back, emphasizing the strong lines of his face. He looked like he could buy the plaza and everyone in it. Then his expression changed. Alpha instincts were immediate and visceral. I watched his pupils dilate, watched his nostrils flare slightly as my scent, inadequately blocked, hit him. The scent blockers were failing. He knew exactly what was happening. Ralph. His voice dropped an octave, rougher. You're in preheat. I'm fine. I stepped back, letting him in before my neighbors got a show. It's just stress. It'll pass. That's not how biology works. He closed the door behind him, and suddenly my apartment felt impossibly small. His alpha pheromones rose in response to mine, protective, concerned, and underneath it all, something darker. Possessive. When did it start? This morning. I have it under control. You're shaking. I was. Tremors running through my hands, my legs. The cramps were getting worse, my body insisting I needed an alpha, needed to submit, needed to. No. Absolutely not. I'd spent my entire adult life refusing to let biology dictate my choices. I'm going to this wedding, I said through gritted teeth. I don't care if my body is staging a mutiny. I'm going. Jamin was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Okay. But we're going to do this safely. He moved into my kitchen like he belonged there, opening cabinets until he found glasses. Sit down before you fall down. I don't need. Ralph. He turned, and the command in his tone made my Omega instincts snap to attention despite my resistance. Sit. Please. The please softened it enough that I could obey without feeling like I was surrendering. I sank onto the sofa, legs unsteady. He returned with water and what looked like pain medication from my bathroom cabinet. Take these. They'll help with the cramping. You went through my medicine cabinet. I'm an alpha, you're in preheat, and we have a wedding in 3 hours. I'm doing what's necessary. He crouched in front of me, bringing himself to eye level. I need you to be honest. Can you actually do this? Because if you can't, we call it off. Your health is more important than revenge. The genuine concern in his voice cracked something in my chest. You'd really back out? Today? Without hesitation. His hand rose, hesitated, then settled on my knee, the touch firm, grounding. This arrangement doesn't mean anything if it hurts you. The warmth of his palms seeped through the fabric of my suit. My Omega biology screamed for more contact, for his scent, for things I absolutely could not have in a fake dating arrangement. I can do this, I said, forcing conviction into my voice. The blockers will hold for a few hours. I just need to get through the ceremony and maybe part of the reception. Then I can leave. Then we can leave, he corrected. I'm not letting you go through this alone. The protectiveness should have annoyed me. Instead, it felt like being valued in a way Minho never had. Minho would have been irritated by the inconvenience, would have suggested I stay home to avoid embarrassment. Jamin was offering to leave with me. Why are you doing this? The question escaped before I could stop it. Really? It's not just class warfare or recognizing a kindred spirit. What's actually in this for you? He was quiet for too long, his hand still on my knee, thumb moving in small circles that he probably didn't realize were soothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with something that sounded dangerously close to honesty. Maybe because 8 months ago, I saw your photo in Architectural Digest and thought you had the most defiant eyes I'd ever seen. Maybe because when you walked into the St. Regis looking terrified and furious in equal measure, I knew I'd say yes to anything you asked. His eyes held mine. Or maybe because somewhere between the lobby and now, this stopped being performance for me. The confession hung between us, too honest for comfort. Jamin. You don't have to say anything. He stood, creating distance, and I immediately missed his touch. Just know that whatever happens today, you're not alone. And if your body decides it can't handle this, we leave. No judgment. No consequences. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He checked his watch. Patek Philippe, understated and probably worth more than my entire year's rent. We should leave in 30 minutes. That gives the medication time to work. Okay. He moved to the window, giving me space, but his alpha presence filled my apartment like a physical thing. Protective. Possessive. Real. This was supposed to be fake. A mutually beneficial arrangement. A performance to prove a point. But the way my body responded to his, the way my Omega instincts recognized his alpha in ways that transcended logic, that was devastatingly, dangerously real. 28 days until my actual heat. 3 hours until I walked into the plaza on the arm of an alpha who was starting to feel less like a hired date and more like something my heart couldn't afford. The terrifying part? I wasn't sure I wanted to stop it anymore. The plaza rose before us like a gilded fortress, all Beaux-Arts grandeur and old money certainty. Limousines lined Fifth Avenue, disgorging couples in designer formal wear, alphas in bespoke suits, omegas in silk and diamonds, all performing their designated roles with practiced precision. Jamin's hand settled on the small of my back as we exited his town car, the touch proprietary and grounding. The medication had dulled the cramps to a manageable ache, and fresh scent blockers masked the worst of my preheat symptoms. I could do this. I would do this. Ready? His voice was low, meant only for me. No. But let's go anyway. His smile was sharp enough to cut. That's my Omega. The possessive pronoun sent heat through my chest that had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with how right it sounded in his voice. The grand ballroom was a study in traditional elegance, crystal chandeliers, ivory linens, centerpieces that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park, spring greenery providing a pastoral backdrop to Manhattan's elite gathering to witness the union of two suitable families. Every head turned as we entered. I felt the weight of their stares, their calculations. The whispers started immediately, a susurrus of speculation rippling through the crowd. That's Ralph Harrison, Minho's ex. Who's the alpha? Is that Jae-min Lee? The Nexus CEO? What's he doing with? Jae-min's hand pressed more firmly against my spine, a silent reminder, I'm here. You're not alone. We moved through the crowd like a knife through silk. People parted, some nodding acknowledgement to Jae-min, others staring with undisguised curiosity. I kept my spine straight, my expression neutral, channeling every ounce of dignity I possessed into not showing how much this cost. Then I saw him. Minho stood near the bar, resplendent in a dove-gray suit that his mother had undoubtedly selected. Next to him, his fiancée, Dae-hyun, was everything I wasn't. Petite, delicate, wearing pastel pink silk that screamed traditional Omega sensibilities. His head was slightly bowed in perfect submissive posture, his hand resting lightly on Minho's arm. The picture of propriety. Everything Minho's family wanted. Everything I had refused to be. Minho's eyes found mine across the ballroom. I watched shock ripple across his features, followed by something darker. His gaze shifted to Jae-min, and recognition hit, followed by unmistakable discomfort. Good. Shall we say hello to the groom? Jae-min's voice held dark amusement. Are you secretly sadistic? Only when the situation calls for it. We crossed the ballroom together, a united front. Minho's expression cycled through emotions too quickly to catalogue. Surprise, confusion, something that might have been regret. Dae-hyun looked between us with wide, uncertain eyes. Ralph. Minho's voice was carefully controlled. I'm surprised you came. Your mother's invitation was very warm, I said, letting the irony hang in the air. I couldn't possibly refuse. Congratulations. Thank you. He extended his hand to Jae-min with visible effort. I don't believe we've met. Jae-min Lee. His handshake was firm enough to assert dominance without being crude. CEO of Nexus Innovations. And Ralph's partner. The word partner, deliberately ambiguous, landed like a grenade. Minho's composure cracked visibly. Partner. I see. His smile didn't reach his eyes. How did you two? We met at MoMA, I supplied smoothly, the rehearsed lie flowing like truth. The architecture exhibition last fall. Jae-min was speaking, I challenged his position on form versus function, and he found me insufficiently deferential. I glanced at Jae-min with practiced affection. Apparently that was appealing. Very appealing, Jae-min confirmed, his hand moving to my waist. Ralph has strong opinions about everything. It's one of his best qualities. The implied criticism of Minho's preference for docility hung unspoken but obvious. Before Minho could respond, 3 of his business associates materialized, older alphas in expensive suits, the kind who made fortunes managing other people's inherited wealth. I recognized one from dinner parties past, Marcus Rothwell, a managing partner at Sterling and Hale who'd always treated me like decorative furniture. Minho, congratulations. Rothwell clapped him on the shoulder, then his gaze slid over me with barely concealed disdain. Ralph. Still playing decorator, I see? The casual dismissal was designed to remind me of my place. To reduce years of professional accomplishment to a hobby. Jae-min's expression didn't change, but his alpha presence expanded, a subtle assertion of dominance that made Rothwell take an involuntary step back. Ralph is currently designing Nexus's new headquarters in Hudson Yards, Jae-min said, his tone conversational but edged with steel. 200,000 square feet of what will likely become the most innovative workspace in Manhattan. His vision is extraordinary, which is why I pursued him for 8 months before he agreed to take on the project. The lie was delivered with such casual confidence that even I almost believed it. Rothwell's expression shifted from condescension to reassessment. Nexus is expanding into headquarters. One of the other associates leaned forward with sudden interest. I'd heard rumors, but Ralph convinced me that our current space doesn't reflect our values, Jamin continued smoothly. He has a gift for understanding how physical space shapes culture. Most designers focus on aesthetics. Ralph focuses on transformation. Minho was staring at me now with an expression I couldn't quite read. Regret? Resentment? The realization that he'd underestimated me? That's quite an accomplishment, Rothwell said, his tone now respectful in ways it never had been when I was simply Minho's Omega. Hudson Yard's development is significant. Ralph's work is always significant, Jamin said. Even when people are too limited to recognize it. The subtle dig at everyone who dismissed me, including Minho, was unmistakable. Daehyun shifted uncomfortably beside Minho, clearly unused to confrontation. His soft voice barely carried when he spoke. It's nice that you found someone who appreciates your work, Ralph. There was no malice in it, just genuine sweetness that made it impossible to hate him. He hadn't stolen Minho. He'd simply been the acceptable choice. Thank you, Daehyun, I said, meaning it. I hope you'll both be very happy. Minho's mother materialized like a bad omen in champagne silk, her smile sharp and assessing. Ralph. How unexpected. Her gaze traveled over Jamin with calculated interest. And you've brought a guest. Mother, this is Jamin Lee, Minho said, his voice tight. CEO of Nexus Innovations. Her expression shifted, recognition, calculation, the social mathematics of whether new money in significant quantities outweighed old money propriety. Mr. Lee. What a pleasure. She extended her hand like a queen offering favor. I wasn't aware you and Ralph were acquainted. We've been together for several months, Jamin said, the lie flowing effortlessly. Ralph's been somewhat private about our relationship. Professional discretion. How modern. The word dripped with implications. Her attention fixed on me like a blade. I'm glad to see you found contentment, Ralph. As I mentioned in my note. The barb was delivered with a smile. The reminder that I'd been deemed inadequate, that contentment was the best someone like me could hope for. Jamin's hand tightened on my waist, protective, possessive. Ralph's found considerably more than contentment, he said quietly, but the authority in his voice commanded the entire circle's attention. He's found someone who values his independence rather than attempting to diminish it. Who celebrates his ambition rather than treating it as a character flaw. His eyes held Minho's mother's gaze without flinching. Some of us are secure enough to want a partner rather than a subordinate. The silence that followed was deafening. Minho's face had gone pale. His mother's smile had frozen into something brittle. Rothwell and his associates suddenly found their drinks fascinating. Daehyun's eyes were wide, probably shocked that anyone would speak to Mrs. Park with such casual dismissal of her authority. I stood there, Jamin's hand on my waist, and felt something shift in my chest. Not just vindication, though that was there, sweet and sharp. But something deeper. The realization that someone was defending me not to prove a point, but because he genuinely believed I deserved defending. If you'll excuse us, Jamin said smoothly, I'd like to introduce Ralph to some colleagues. We walked away, leaving them in our wake. My hands were shaking. That was necessary, he finished. And true. The terrifying part? It had felt true. All of it. The ceremony had been mercifully brief, traditional vows, orchestrated perfection, Daehyun's soft voice pledging obedience in ways that made my skin crawl. Throughout it all, Jamin's hand had remained steady on mine, his thumb tracing small circles against my palm that kept me grounded when the preheat symptoms threatened to resurface. Now, the reception was in full swing. The ballroom had transformed into a glittering celebration of everything old money could buy. Champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's weekly groceries, a string quartet playing tasteful classical arrangements, and enough social posturing to fuel a semester of anthropology lectures. Jamin and I had navigated the crowd with practiced ease, his introduction of me as his partner opening doors that had been firmly closed when I was simply Minho's decorator. People who dismissed me at previous events suddenly wanted to discuss my work, ask about the Hudson Yards project, inquire about my availability for consultations. The power of association. The currency of an alpha's endorsement. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it tasted like vindication laced with bitterness. We were near the terrace doors, discussing the merits of sustainable materials with a surprisingly progressive real estate developer, when Minho's mother appeared with the precision of a heat-seeking missile. She'd clearly been waiting for an opportunity to isolate us, and the developer's departure to refresh his drink provided it. Mr. Lee. Her smile was all practiced grace and underlying steel. I wonder if I might have a word about your background. Jamin's expression remained neutral, but I felt him tense beside me. Of course, Mrs. Park. She gestured to a quieter corner near the windows, away from the main crowd but visible enough to maintain propriety. Several guests drifted closer, pretending interest in the park view while clearly listening. I've been doing some research on Nexus Innovations, she began, her tone suggesting she'd unearthed something distasteful. Quite a success story. Building a tech empire from, what was it, a studio apartment in Brooklyn. The way she said Brooklyn made it sound like a communicable disease. That's correct. Jamin's voice remained even. I started Nexus 9 years ago with a laptop and determination. How industrious. The word was poisoned honey. Though I understand your family wasn't in the technology sector, your mother worked in service industries. The intentional vagueness was designed to diminish, to imply something shameful about honest work. I felt rage building in my chest, but Jamin's hand on my back pressed gently, a silent communication. Let me handle this. My mother ran a community center in Queens, he said clearly, projecting enough that the eavesdropping guests could hear. She provided after-school programs for children whose parents worked multiple jobs, taught ESL classes to immigrants, organized food drives and job training workshops. His voice carried quiet pride. She spent 30 years serving her community. I'd hardly diminish that as service industries. Mrs. Park's smile tightened. Of course. Very charitable. Though hardly the traditional foundation for someone moving in certain circles. Her gaze flicked to me. But then, tradition seems to be somewhat flexible in your relationship. The implication was clear. We were both outsiders, pretenders to status we hadn't inherited. I'm curious, Mrs. Park, Jamin said, his tone conversational but sharp. What exactly did your family do to earn their wealth? Beyond being born into it, I mean. Several guests made small, shocked sounds. One didn't question old money's origins, it was simply accepted as natural order. Mrs. Park's face flushed. The Park family has a distinguished history in shipping, yes. I'm aware. Jamin's research was showing. Your grandfather built his fortune in the 1960s through advantageous government contracts. Impressive political connections. Very strategic. He paused, letting the implication of favoritism rather than merit hang in the air. But tell me, what have you personally built? What have you created that didn't exist before? The silence was absolute. I could feel the attention of every nearby guest locked on this exchange. I've raised a son, Mrs. Park said coldly. Maintained a household. Preserved our family's standing. All valuable, Jamin interrupted smoothly. But not creation. Not innovation. You've managed inheritance. His eyes held hers without flinching. My mother built community from nothing. I built Nexus from an idea. Ralph, his hand moved to my waist, claiming and protective, transforms empty spaces into environments that change how people work, live, and interact. We create value. We don't simply preserve it. Mrs. Park's composure was cracking. This is hardly appropriate conversation for. You question my background, Jamin said, voice harder now. Implied that inherited wealth somehow conveys superior worth. I'm simply correcting that misapprehension. He glanced at the watching guests, then back to her. Real worth isn't inherited, Mrs. Park. It's built through work, vision, and the courage to create rather than merely curate. And I suppose that's what attracted you to Ralph. Her tone turned vicious. His confused notion that independence is the same as value? That rejecting traditional Omega roles makes him somehow superior. The attack on me was designed to wound, to reduce me back to the inadequate Omega who couldn't satisfy her son. Jamin's alpha presence expanded, filling the space with barely restrained dominance. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. Ralph didn't reject traditional roles. He rejected subjugation disguised as tradition. Each word was precisely delivered. There's a significant difference between an Omega who chooses submission as an expression of their nature and an Omega who's expected to diminish themselves so fragile alphas feel secure. His eyes never left Mrs. Park's face. Your son wanted the latter. I value the former. Ralph chose strength over submission to outdated hierarchies, he continued, and I could feel the attention of every guest now. This was the kind of confrontation that would be discussed in social circles for months. He chose to build rather than simply exist as decoration in someone else's accomplishment. That's not confusion, Mrs. Park. That's integrity. Her face had gone pale, then flushed with anger. You have no right to speak about my family. You questioned my background. You dismissed my mother's life work. You insulted my partner. Jamin's voice remained level, but the alpha authority in it was undeniable. I have every right to respond. And here's what I want you to understand. Ralph's worth was never determined by his willingness to make himself smaller. It was only determined by whether the people around him were secure enough to appreciate his full magnitude. He turned slightly, addressing the watching crowd as much as Mrs. Park. My mother used to say that people who inherited everything fear those who built something, because inheritance can be lost but capability can't be taken away. His smile was sharp. She was right. The difference between old money and new money isn't prestige, it's that we remember what it took to earn it. The silence that followed was thunderous. Mrs. Park stood frozen, her carefully constructed authority dismantled in under 5 minutes. The guests who'd been listening wore expressions ranging from shock to poorly concealed satisfaction. Apparently, Mrs. Park's elitism had made her few genuine friends. Minho appeared at his mother's elbow, face tight with embarrassment. Mother, perhaps we should. I think that's an excellent idea, Jamin said pleasantly. Congratulations again on your wedding, Minho. I hope it brings you everything you deserve. The double meaning wasn't subtle. Jamin guided me away, his hand steady on my back. We made it to the terrace before my knees went weak. I need to sit down, I said, voice unsteady. He led me to a stone bench overlooking Central Park, the spring evening cool against my overheated skin. My preheat symptoms were resurging, exacerbated by stress and alpha pheromones and the emotional overload of watching someone defend me with a kind of ferocity I'd never experienced. That was? I couldn't find words. Overdue, Jamin said quietly. She's been diminishing people for years. Someone needed to stop accepting it. You destroyed her. In front of everyone. She tried to destroy you first. His hand found mine, fingers interlacing. And Ralph? Everything I said was true. Your worth was never the question. Their inability to recognize it was their failure, not yours. I looked at him, this alpha who'd agreed to a fake arrangement and somewhere along the way had started defending me like it was real. Like I mattered beyond the performance. Why? The question came out broken. Why do you care this much? His thumb traced my knuckles, the touch grounding. Because 8 months ago, I saw your work and thought you had vision. 4 days ago, I heard your story and thought you had courage. He met my eyes. And right now, I'm realizing I've been lying to both of us about what this arrangement actually means to me. My heart stopped. Restarted. Thundered. Jamin. We should talk, he said. But not here. Not now. Somewhere private. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Behind us, through the terrace doors, I could see the reception continuing. Minho and his perfect traditional Omega. His mother's carefully constructed hierarchy temporarily disrupted but not destroyed. And out here, in the cooling evening, an alpha who just burned down social bridges to defend an Omega he was supposed to be fake dating. Nothing about this was fake anymore. And that terrified me more than any of Mrs. Park's cruelty ever could. The terrace wrapped around the corner of the plaza, offering a view of Central Park's darkening expanse and Manhattan's glittering skyline beyond. String lights cast soft illumination, and the sounds of the reception, laughter, music, clinking crystal, filtered through like a distant dream. We were alone. Finally, completely alone. I leaned against the stone balustrade, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 3 hours. The confrontation. Jamin's defense. The way he'd systematically dismantled Mrs. Park's elitism while half of Manhattan's social elite watched. The way he'd called me his partner like he meant it. Your hands are shaking again, Jamin observed, moving to stand beside me. Close enough that I could feel his body heat, smell his scent cutting through my failing blockers, sandalwood and something warmer, uniquely him. Preheat symptoms, I said, though we both knew it wasn't just biology anymore. And adrenaline. And the surreal experience of watching someone actually defend me instead of asking me to apologize for existing. You shouldn't have to apologize for existing, Ralph. You should never have to apologize for that. The gentleness in his voice cracked something open in my chest. I turned to face him, the city lights casting shadows across his features, making him look both softer and more dangerous. Why did you really agree to this? The question I'd been avoiding for days finally escaped. And don't give me the speech about recognizing kindred spirits or class warfare. The truth, Jamin. He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the skyline. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with something that sounded like confession. Do you remember that Architectural Digest feature? The Tribeca Hotel redesign? Of course. It published last October. There was a photo of you in the article. Small, just a headshot accompanying your interview about design philosophy. He turned to look at me, and the intensity in his eyes stole my breath. You said something about how good design should make people feel free rather than contained. How spaces should expand possibility rather than enforce limitation. I remember. I'd been proud of that interview, of articulating my vision in ways that felt true. I stared at that photo for 20 minutes, Jamin continued. At your eyes, defiant and certain and completely uncompromising. And I thought, that's someone who refuses to be contained. His jaw tightened. I started following your work obsessively after that. Every project, every interview, every gallery opening you attended. I told myself it was professional interest. That I genuinely needed an interior designer for Nexus expansion. My heart was hammering. That wasn't a lie? About reaching out to my firm? I contacted your office 3 times. Your assistant said you were booked for 18 months. I was working up the courage to approach you directly, maybe at an industry event, somewhere it wouldn't seem too forward, when you walked into the St. Regis and propositioned me. His smile was self-deprecating. I knew exactly who you were before you said your name. Ralph Harrison, the Omega who told Metropolitan Home that submission and strength weren't opposites. The world tilted. You said yes because I wanted any excuse to know you. The confession landed between us like a physical thing. Because I'd been half obsessed with someone I'd never met for 8 months. Because when you asked me to pretend to be your partner, all I could think was, this is my chance. I couldn't breathe. Jamin. I know. He ran a hand through his hair, destroying its careful styling. I know this was supposed to be business. A mutually beneficial arrangement. Fake dating to prove a point. His eyes found mine. But Ralph, I stopped pretending somewhere around our first dinner. Maybe before that. Maybe the moment you walked across that lobby looking terrified and furious and absolutely magnificent. The preheat symptoms surged, biology responding to emotional truth, to an alpha's pheromones declaring interest, claim, want. My scent blockers were failing completely now, jasmine and burned sugar flooding the space between us. I don't know how to do this, I admitted, voice breaking. I spent 3 years with someone who wanted me smaller. Who treated my ambition like a character flaw. I don't know how to trust that you're different. Then let me show you. Jamin moved closer, and I could feel the heat of him, the barely restrained alpha dominance that he kept so carefully controlled. Let me prove that I don't want you smaller. I want you exactly as you are, sharp and ambitious and uncompromising. I want your defiance and your vision and the way you challenge everything. What if I'm too broken? The fear escaped before I could stop it. What if Minho was right and I'm just? Stop. His hand rose, cupping my face with devastating gentleness. Minho was an insecure alpha who needed an omega who made him feel powerful. I'm an alpha who wants a partner who makes me better. His thumb traced my cheekbone. You're not broken, Ralph. You're just surrounded by people too small to contain you. The words echoed what he'd said to Mrs. Park, but hearing them directed at me, feeling the truth of them in his touch, it shattered the last of my defenses. What are we doing? I whispered. What if we stopped pretending? His voice was rough. What if this stopped being fake? The question hung between us, terrifying and inevitable. That wasn't part of the arrangement. Fuck the arrangement. His other hand found my waist, pulling me closer. I want a real arrangement. One where I get to take you to dinner because I want to hear your opinions on everything. Where I get to call you mine because you actually are. Where this, his fingers tightened on my waist, isn't performance. My hands found his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath expensive fabric. I'm in preheat. You can't trust what I... This isn't your biology talking, and we both know it. His forehead dropped to mine, breath mingling. Tell me you haven't felt this. Tell me the last 4 days have been purely professional for you. Tell me you can walk away from this and feel nothing. I couldn't. God help me, I couldn't. I'm terrified, I confessed. So am I. His admission was raw. I've built an empire, faced down hostile boards, negotiated with people who wanted to destroy me. And none of that scares me as much as the thought of you walking away. The city glittered around us, a million lights, a million lives, a million moments happening simultaneously. And in this one, on this terrace, the performance we'd constructed was crumbling into something real. Kiss me, I said, the words escaping before courage could fail. Not for show. Not for the cameras or the audience or to prove anything. Just, kiss me. Jamin's control shattered. His mouth found mine with barely restrained desperation, not gentle, not practiced, but real. His hand tightened in my hair, angling my head as he deepened the kiss, and I melted into him with a sound that was half surrender, half victory. This wasn't the careful choreography of fake dating. This was need and want and 8 months of obsession meeting 4 days of pretending colliding into honest desire. His alpha pheromones crashed over me, demanding and possessive, and my omega biology sang in response, not submission, but recognition. This alpha wanted all of me, the sharp edges and defiance included. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes were dark with want. So, he said roughly, are we done pretending? I kissed him again, answer and agreement and promise. Yeah, I whispered against his mouth. We're done pretending. Behind us, the reception continued. Minho and his perfect traditional marriage. Mrs. Park's carefully constructed hierarchy. The world that had deemed me inadequate. And out here, under the Manhattan sky, an alpha who'd seen my defiance and wanted me anyway. Who defended me not because I was his omega, but because he believed I deserved defending. Who turned a fake arrangement into something that felt more real than anything I'd ever known. Take me home, I said. Jamin's smile was sharp and possessive and devastatingly tender. Already thinking of my place as home? I'm in preheat and I just kissed my fake date at my ex's wedding. I'm not thinking clearly about anything. I gripped his lapels. But I know I don't want to be here anymore. I want to be somewhere private where we can figure out what this, I gestured between us, actually is. It's real, he said simply. Everything else, we'll figure out together. Together. The words settled into my chest like coming home. We left the reception without goodbyes, Jamin's hand firm on my back as we navigated through the ballroom. I caught Minho's eyes across the crowd, saw surprise, confusion, maybe regret. I didn't care anymore. The omega he deemed inadequate was walking out with an alpha who valued strength over submission. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was enough. More than enough. Exactly right. 6 months later, I stood in the Stenhart Conservatory at Brooklyn Botanic Garden, surrounded by late October foliage and the kind of nervous energy that comes from choosing happiness on your own terms. The conservatory was a cathedral of glass and greenery, exactly what I'd wanted for the bonding ceremony Minho had dismissed as too informal. Sunlight filtered through tropical palms and orchids, casting dappled shadows across reclaimed wood chairs where our guests sat in a deliberately mixed arrangement, no alpha side or omega side, no rigid hierarchy of seating by designation or status. Just people we loved, gathered to witness something real. My father sat in the front row next to Jamin's mother, Mrs. Lee, a woman who'd greeted me with a crushing hug and immediate acceptance, asking about my work before anything else. She wore a hanbok in deep blue silk, her pride in her son evident in every gesture. My mother, elegant in a dove-grey dress from her London gallery opening, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief embroidered with small wolves, a private joke about my fierce Omega nature that Jamin found endlessly amusing. My younger sister, Sophie, serving as my attendant, squeezed my hand. You look terrified and happy in equal measure. That's an accurate assessment. Good. That's how you're supposed to look when you're making a choice that matters. She adjusted the silver cufflinks, a gift from Jamin engraved with coordinates, the exact location where I'd first approached him at the St. Regis. Ready? I took a breath, smoothing the charcoal suit I'd chosen, tailored perfectly, androgynous and powerful, with a waistcoat in midnight blue that matched Jamin's tie. No traditional Omega attire. No pastel silk or symbolic submission. Just me, exactly as I was. Ready. The string quartet began, not Pachelbel or Wagner, but a contemporary piece we'd chosen together, something that felt like possibility rather than tradition. Sophie walked down the aisle first, and then it was my turn. Jamin stood at the end of the conservatory aisle, flanked by his best friend and business partner, Marcus. But I only had eyes for him, tall and commanding in a black suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, his expression unguarded in ways he rarely allowed in public. He was looking at me like I was the answer to a question he'd been asking his entire life. I walked toward him, not given away by my father, not escorted as property transferred between households, but walking of my own volition toward a future I was choosing. When I reached him, he extended his hand. I took it, and the rightness of the gesture settled into my bones. The officiant, a friend of Jamin's mother who'd known him since childhood, smiled warmly. We gather today not to witness a transaction, but a transformation. Not to observe obligation, but to celebrate choice. The ceremony was brief, personal, stripped of the rigid protocols that had suffocated me in Minho's world. We'd written our own vows, blending British and American and Korean traditions into something that belonged entirely to us. Jamin went first, his deep voice steady despite the emotion I could see in his eyes. Ralph, 8 months ago, I saw your photo in a magazine and thought you had defiant eyes. 4 months ago, you walked into a hotel lobby and gave me an excuse to know you. Today, I'm standing here asking you to let me keep knowing you. Every sharp edge, every ambitious dream, every moment you refused to make yourself smaller. His thumb traced my knuckles. You asked me once why I valued your independence. The answer is simple, because your strength doesn't diminish mine. It amplifies it. You make me better not by serving me, but by challenging me. By being exactly who you are. He paused, and I saw him blink back emotion. I promise to never ask you to be less. To defend your right to be more. To build a life where your ambition has as much space as mine. Where partnership means equal footing, not hierarchical arrangement. His smile was tender. I promise to love the Omega who told an entire ballroom that submission and strength aren't opposites. Who proves it every single day. My turn. I'd rehearsed these vows 100 times, but standing here, looking at him, the words I'd prepared felt inadequate. So I spoke from the raw truth instead. Jamin, 3 years ago, someone told me I was too willful to be a proper Omega. That my independence was a character flaw. That I needed to choose between ambition and worthiness. My voice cracked slightly. I believed him. I spent years trying to make myself acceptable, convincing myself that love required diminishment. I looked out at our guests, at my family who'd always supported me, at Mrs. Lee who'd welcomed me with fierce acceptance, at the friends who'd watched me slowly reclaim myself over the past 6 months. Then you saw me at my most desperate, performing a charade to prove I wasn't broken, and you said yes. Not because you needed an Omega. Not because you wanted someone decorative or deferential. But because you recognized something in me worth defending. Jamin's grip on my hands tightened. I thought I needed to prove I was enough, I continued. Instead, I found someone who knew I was always more than enough. Who valued my defiance. Who built space for my dreams alongside his own. Tears were threatening now, but I pushed through. You didn't save me, Jamin. You saw me. And that made all the difference. I took a breath, steadying myself. I promised to never make myself smaller to make you feel bigger. To challenge you when you need challenging, support you when you need supporting, and love you with the same ferocity you've shown me. I promise to build a life where we're partners in every sense, equal footing, shared dreams, mutual respect. My smile was watery but genuine. I promised to love the alpha who dismantled social hierarchies at a wedding reception because someone insulted my work. Who proves every day that strength and tenderness aren't opposites. The officiant's voice was suspiciously thick when she continued. The bonds we choose are stronger than the bonds we inherit. Jamin, Ralph, you've chosen each other not because society demands it, but because your hearts require it. That choice, renewed every day, is the foundation of lasting partnership. The traditional exchange of bonding marks came next, not a claiming bite, but a deliberate choice. Jamin's mark on my neck was gentle despite his alpha instincts, a brand that said chosen rather than owned. My mark on his neck, smaller but no less significant, declared the same. This was mutual selection, equal partnership. By the power vested in me, and witnessed by those who love you, I declare you bonded partners. You may seal this bond. Jamin kissed me with the kind of tenderness that comes from certainty, not the desperate passion of our first kiss on the plaza terrace, but the deep assurance of someone who knows exactly what they are choosing and why. The conservatory erupted in applause. Mrs. Lee was crying openly. My mother was beaming. Sophie was recording everything on her phone, probably already planning to embarrass me with the footage at future family gatherings. We walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, and I felt lighter than I had in years. The reception was held at our Tribeca penthouse, my latest design project and our shared home. I'd spent 4 months transforming the raw space into something that represented both of us. Industrial elements softened by organic textures, minimalist Korean aesthetics blended with British warmth, soaring ceilings that created a sense of freedom rather than containment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Manhattan. The open-concept living space flowed into a chef's kitchen where Jamin actually cooked, a discovery that had delighted me. My design studio occupied the south corner, flooded with natural light, while his home office claimed the north side with views of the Hudson. Equal space. Equal priority. Equal partnership. Guests wandered through, admiring the design, and I watched Jamin accept congratulations with his mother at his side. She caught my eye across the room and mouthed thank you. For what, I wasn't certain. For loving her son? For being loved by him? For proving that worth wasn't about designation hierarchies but authentic connection? Maybe all of it. Sophie appeared with champagne. So, how does it feel to be bonded to a billionaire alpha who literally dismantled social hierarchies for you? Terrifying and right in equal measure, I admitted. Good answer. She clinked her glass against mine. For what it's worth, I never liked Minho. He looked at you like you were a project to be managed. Jamin looks at you like you're a mystery worth solving. When did you become wise? I've always been wise. You were just too busy trying to fit into boxes that were never designed for you. She kissed my cheek. I'm proud of you, Ralph. For choosing yourself. For finding someone who chose you back. Jamin materialized beside me, his hand finding its natural place on my waist, protective, possessive, proud. The bonding mark on his neck was visible above his collar, and I felt a fierce satisfaction seeing it there. Mine. He was mine the same way I was his, by choice, not obligation. Your sister was just telling me about the time you redesigned your college dorm room and got cited for unauthorized structural modifications, he said, eyes dancing with amusement. Sophie, you're dead to me. I'm sharing historical context. Your partner deserves to know about your rebellious past. My rebellious past is well documented, I said dryly. It's why I'm standing here instead of serving tea at someone else's social functions. Jamin's arm tightened around me. Best rebellion I've ever witnessed. The evening continued, toasts and laughter, Mrs. Lee sharing stories of Jamin's childhood ambition, my father discussing literature with Jamin's business partners, the kind of organic connection that happens when people gather out of genuine affection rather than social obligation. Later, after the last guests departed and the caterers cleaned up, Jamin and I stood at the windows overlooking the city. The bonding mark on my neck pulsed with pleasant warmth, biological recognition of the bond we'd chosen. Any regrets? He asked, pulling me against his chest. About the ceremony? The bonding? Choosing you? I tilted my head to look at him. Not even slightly. Good. His lips brushed my temple. Because I have plans for us. Long-term, ambitious plans that involve you being exactly who you are for the next several decades. Only several decades. I'm being conservative. I'm actually thinking eternity, but didn't want to seem presumptuous. I laughed, the sound free and genuine. 6 months ago, I'd been standing in a hotel lobby, desperate and terrified, asking a stranger to help me prove I wasn't broken. Now I was standing in our home, bonded to someone who'd never thought I needed fixing. I love you, I said simply. I know. His smile was tender. You told 200 people earlier in very eloquent vows. I'm telling you now. Just us. No performance. No audience. I turned in his arms, meeting his eyes. I love you, Jaemin Lee. For seeing me. For choosing me. For building a life where I don't have to choose between being an Omega and being myself. You never had to choose, Ralph. His forehead dropped to mine. The world just needed to catch up to what I knew from the moment you crossed that lobby. You're extraordinary exactly as you are. The city glittered beyond our windows, the same view I'd seen from the Plaza Terrace, but transformed by context. Then, it had represented everything I thought I'd lost. Now, it represented everything I'd gained. Not by proving I was enough, but by finding someone who'd always known I was more than enough. Jaemin's hand rested protectively over my waist, his bonding mark visible on his neck, equal partners in every sense that mattered. This was the real beginning. And it was perfect.